We have dying in a plane crash. It is every traveler's nightmare, especially when turbulence occurs. Although you're in a plane crash, it's not necessarily you're gonna die. In fact, of the 568 US plane crashes between 1980 and 2000, more than 90% of the crash victims actually survive. In fact, your chances of surviving your next flight is 99.99, which isn't too bad. But imagine you were in a plane crash, how scary it would be. You have no idea what's happening. You have this small window to look out of, and all you're thinking is, oh my god, the ground is coming closer and closer. The oxygen mask starts to fall. Everyone is totally freaking out, losing their minds. There is panic in this plane. You're not sure when the high impact is gonna occur. And are you gonna smack into land and instantly die or get crushed? Or are you going to be in the water and now you have to fight for your life by swimming? So now this brings us into the number 9 spot, and we're talking about drowning. Drowning refers to a process where the person experiences respiratory impairments as a result of the submersion and immersion in liquid. Drowning is the third leading cause of intentional injury death worldwide. And it's estimated that 372,000 people annually die. So if you were to estimate that, that's about 10 people per day. In Europe, drowning was used as a form of capital punishment, and it was one of the most practiced forms of execution until the 17th and 18th century. Can you guys just imagine going underwater? The first thing that comes to your mind is panic, freak out. You have no idea when your last breath is. You're just gasping for air. And everything just suddenly goes dark. You're blacking out, in and out of consciousness. You have no idea what's going on. What is your body doing? Your body actually fights for survival. But at this point, there's just nothing you can do. Coming in at number, we have being burned alive. Many societies have used this as an execution method for such crimes as treason, rebellious actions by slaves, heresy, witchcraft, and demonstrated sexual deviancy, such as incest or homosexuality. The best known type of execution of death by burning is when the guilty is bound to a large wooden stake. Just imagine being tied down to a board, and you're being doused by gasoline or anything flammable. And then you hear the match lit, and you're just there, helpless. Your skin starts to burn and you feel everything. The panic kicks in, you're looking around, and your skin starts to boil up. Usually people don't die from the fire itself, they die from the carbon monoxide poisoning, which is smoke inhalation. So unless you're closed off in a room, it's gonna take you some time to pass out or die. And what's worse than being burned alive is adrift at sea, and this comes in at number 7. There's many hazards in the ocean that will decrease the chances of survival if you are adrift at sea. You are most likely to suffer from dehydration. So imagine being out there in the open waters, lost. There's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do but try to survive. So you're out there barely surviving. Some of you guys are probably wishing that you would die right now. Hyperthermia is another thing to watch out for if you're adrift at sea. Hyperthermia is when your body loses more heat than it produces and your core body temperature drops. If you've made it through starvation, dehydration, and hyperthermia, well, guess what? You still need to worry about sea creatures. There is so many things to look out for. Imagine piranhas. These things are so little, but they'll eat you alive, or a shark. So now this easily brings me into the number 6 spot. We've kind of already talked about it, but we're talking about getting eaten alive by an animal. You just lowered yourself in the food chain and you've just become prey. Imagine the animal biting you limb for limb, and all you can do is watch and scream. You're in such shock you have no idea if you're alive or if you've just died. You're seeing things that you've never seen before and you don't ever want to see again. There is just so much blood everywhere. There's bones being snapped out, and your body is bending in ways that it should never be bending in. Or imagine this, being eaten alive by a snake whole. If you weren't crushed to death, you're now living inside of a snake just waiting to die. Starvation comes in at number 5. Starvation can cause permanent organ damage and eventually death. There's insufficient scientific data on exactly how long people can live without food. Although the length of time obviously varies with an individual's percent of body fat and general health. So usually with adults, starvation can lead to death within 8 to 12 weeks. There's cases of individual people living for 25 weeks without food. Starvation usually begins when the individual loses about 30% of their body weight. Once the loss reaches more than 40%, death is almost inevitable. On average, around 25,000 people die every day due to hunger or hunger-related causes. This means every 3.5 seconds, one person dies. Moving on to number 4, we have freeze to death. Imagine it's getting colder and colder and colder. you're probably living in Canada, but jokes aside, your movements are getting slower. You're surrounded by cold and there's just nothing you can do. You're having severe problems breathing and you can see your skin turning blue and black. You know you're gonna die, you just don't know when. Your body starts to shiver uncontrollably and you are noticing that you've stopped moving. The only thing you feel is your heart beating, your thoughts in your head, and your eyes are wandering around. During this whole process, you're in and out of consciousness. You're thinking like, was this my last breath? Okay, was this one my last breath? Is this one gonna be my last breath? And then all of a sudden, you black out and you thought you just died. But no, you wake up, you're breathing slow all over again, and you're going through this whole process again. Now I know it's hard to imagine something worse than that, but moving into number 3 spot, we're talking about falling. You're on top of a really tall building and you went a little bit too far off the edge. Or imagine this, you're skydiving and your parachute malfunctions. Scary, I know. You're now falling into your inevitable death. You are fully aware of everything that's happening and you know that when you're gonna hit the ground, you're gonna suffer from severe injuries, and if they're so severe, you're gonna die. But a lot of you guys might have a little bit of hope while you're falling that you know what, you might live. So you have all these thoughts just rushing through your head, you're freaking out, you're panicking. A lot of you might pass out in the air because you just couldn't take it, you couldn't handle it. And for the others, you hope that you just pass out in the air and then that's it for you in the sky, instead of plummeting to the ground and feeling everything. Falls is actually the second leading cause of accidental death worldwide. In 2003, unintentional falls resulted in 556,000 deaths. Okay, coming into number 2 spot, for the worst way to die, we have being tortured. Torture continues to be practiced today. In fact, torture takes place in majority of the countries in the world, as many as 90% of them. It is most often takes place in places of detention, whether it's initially police lockup, interrogation rooms, prison systems, or any other places that people are deprived of their freedom. While such techniques from the Middle Ages are no longer used on a large scale, the techniques of torture are still just as cruel, inhumane, and painful to the victims. The scariest part about being tortured is you have no idea their intentions and what's gonna happen to you. You're gonna be going through enduring pain. There's gonna be so much pain you just want to die instantly, but you're being tortured, so that person is not gonna let you die. I don't know what's worse, the anticipation of the whole thing or the fact that you're slowly being dismembered. Okay, so finally we've made it to the number 1 spot. This to me is the absolute worst way to die. Let me know if you guys agree, but I'm talking about being buried alive. There is lots of fears that you're going to be battling. There is being claustrophobic, starvation, dehydration, hyperthermia, and these are just to name a few of the many things. Just imagine being trapped with nothing to do but listen to your own thoughts. Anyone would go absolutely crazy. They would become delusional and panic. You're slowly being suffocated, there's no air to breathe, and again, there's nothing you can do about it. And guess what? The soil above you acts as a sound barrier, so there's no point yelling out for help because there's no one can hear you. Unless grandpa's hearing aids are turned up like mega high, you're just there to die. So you're just there and you want to die quickly, but there's nothing you can do to take your own life. Your body can actually survive 8 to 10 days without water, and if for some reason you're able to get water, well, you're just gonna prolong your life and you can live about 3 weeks without food. And then your insides just start eating itself out, your body's just deteriorating. I mean, how petrifying is this whole situation?
At number 10, which is death by radiation. Radiation sickness is caused from extreme ionizing radiation and kills us by breaking up our DNA and either killing our cells or mutating them into cancer. It's mainly caused by receiving a large dose of radiation over a short period of time, which is called acute, or a small dose spread out over a long time, known as chronic. Symptoms include nausea, vomiting, headaches and diarrhea, and can be fatal depending on the dosage and how quickly it is medically treated. Now, although it's a brutal way to die, it's actually quite rare and only seems to happen in big nuclear power plant accidents like Chernobyl in 1986, in which 41 people died from radiation poisoning. Moving on to our number 9 now, it's decompression, better known as the bends. The bends is an illness that can affect anyone from scuba divers to pilots, and it's caused by the body experiencing a sudden change in atmospheric pressure. The air that divers breathe contains a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen, but when they dive, the body doesn't absorb the nitrogen. As the diver goes deeper, the pressure of the nitrogen in the body increases, and if they resurface too quickly, nitrogen bubbles can block blood flow and even tear nerves. If severe enough, the bends can lead to a painful death, with the last few hours of the victim's life being painful, tiring, and often including vomiting or deafness. The only good thing I can think of about the bends is the Radiohead album. Other than that, it really sucks, and you guys should definitely be careful and always follow the guidelines if you ever do scuba diving. Moving on with our morbid journey now, it's anaphylaxis at number 8. Now, a lot of you guys out there have allergies to different things. I have hay fever, which means I'm allergic to certain types of pollen, but if you have an extreme allergy, it's called anaphylaxis and it can kill you. Where normal allergies can cause slight itching or irritation of the eyes, nose and throat, an anaphylactic reaction will cause your throat to swell, stopping airflow and lowering your blood pressure to lethal levels. The terrifying thing is that this can be caused by anything from bee stings to medication and peanuts, and there's no way of knowing what might cause it unless you get tested. I used to think my hay fever allergy was the worst thing in the world, but grass and tree pollen never killed me, so thank you hay fever. I never thought I'd say the words thank you hay fever. Anyway guys, let's move on to our number 7, which is water intoxication. In 2007, a woman died taking part in a radio station's contest called Hold Your Wee for a Wee to see how much water she could drink without going to the bathroom to win a Wii console. The cause of death was water intoxication. If you think that's crazy, well, it's actually the main cause of water intoxication because normally people just don't hold their pee in for obvious reasons. If you do though, then the excess amount of water in your body can cause your brain to swell, putting pressure on the brain which leads to pain, twitching, cramping, nausea, vomiting, and if serious enough, death. So guys, next time you hear someone say they're dying to go to the bathroom, it's probably best to just let them go, because it's much better to be dying to go than to die from not. From too much liquid to too much food now, we've got overeating at number 6. Although many of you guys have probably joked at Thanksgiving or Christmas about being so full you're gonna burst, you were probably quite a way off, but it does happen and it can kill people. The human stomach can comfortably hold about 1.5 litres, but can go up to 3 litres and still perform okay. But once you start reaching 5 litres, you're asking for trouble. One woman whose stomach ruptured and imploded from overeating was found to have 12 litres of food inside her stomach. Can you guys imagine how much food that actually is? I feel a bit sick just talking about it. Alright guys, one thing that will kill you no matter how much you take of it is poison, in at number 5. Although poison has been killing people for thousands of years, it's taken many different forms throughout history. There's ancient poisons like cyanide, or more modern types such as polonium-210, which is often cited as the most deadly poison of all. 1 gram of this stuff could wipe out 10 million people. Poisons work by mimicking bodily chemicals and then shutting down vital processes. Arsenic, for example, mimics phosphate, which is essential for supplying human cells with energy. But when arsenic replaces the phosphate and doesn't supply energy to your body's cells, you die. Damn nature, you scary. If you guys don't believe me, then we've got lethal lightning strikes in at number 4. So far alone, there have been 26 people killed in the US by lightning strikes in 2015. They are rare, but when they strike hard and can be fatal. A lightning strike can reach up to 50,000 degrees and will cook anything it comes into contact with, especially humans. If they do hit you, they can stop your heart dead, right there and then. Also, you're much more likely to die from a brain injury than by burns, because when lightning hits you, up to 1 billion volts will pass through the first thing it comes into contact with, which is normally your head. What a shocking fact. Sorry, I couldn't resist the pun there, but let's move on to number 3, which is being crushed to death. People can get crushed to death in all kinds of ways. For example, vending machines crush about 10 to 13 people a year in the US, but the worst cases of death by crushing is when it takes place in a crowd. The Hajj pilgrimage taken by Muslims to Mecca is notorious for crowds stampeding in small places and crushing people to death. This year was the worst in recorded history, with over 700 deaths. The most famous one in England was the Hillsborough disaster, where overcrowding at a football game saw 96 people killed and over 750 injured as people were crushed to death against each other. With most of the world now living in built-up city areas, the fear of being crushed is almost an inevitable threat. And it's not quick and it's not pretty. But something that can be even more terrifying to experience is choking, and that's our number 2. The worst thing about choking is that there's an almost infinite number of things you can choke on. Every year about 17,000 children are treated in the hospitals for choking related incidents, and about 80% of those occur in children aged 4 years and younger. The majority of people who die from choking do so by choking on food, with some of the most common items being hot dogs, hard candy, chewing gum and popcorn. If any of these block air from getting to your lungs, you'll be dead within 6 minutes. And I know we've all had that moment when you're eating and a little bit of food goes down the wrong hole and you can't breathe for a moment. It's pretty scary. Alright guys, we got this far and we're all still alive, so good job there. And I think it's time to announce that our number 1 worst death is crucifixion. Made famous by the story of Jesus Christ's execution, this nasty form of capital punishment was invented by the Persians but popularized by the Romans, and is possibly the cruelest way to die that's ever been devised. It involved the victim being nailed to a cross by their hands and feet, which meant the whole of their weight was bearing down on their fresh wounds, tearing into the flesh, causing excruciating pain. In fact, crucifixion is actually where the word excruciating came from. After being nailed to the cross, they are left there for days, in which time death was brought on by causes including heart failure, infection from the wounds, dehydration, or even being killed by animals. The most common cause though was often asphyxiation, caused by the exhaustion of having to lift your body up to even breathe. It's our number 1 because it doesn't just kill you, it intentionally tries to make it as long, slow and painful as it possibly can. And if there's one thing worse than a death, it's a long, painful death.
In at number 10, we have being frozen alive with the promise of a defrosting in a technologically advanced future, but then realizing it's all a trick. Yes, so that's some real level Bond villain stuff going on there. Can you imagine being promised a better future by some nut who says, hey, I'm gonna freeze you and you're gonna be frosted in like 10 years from now and you'll wake up in a new future and you'll be famous as like a person from the past. And you're all excited to be frozen, then you get to the freezer, your friend comes along and just as you're losing consciousness is like, lol, joke, killed you. The worst. In at number 9, we have floating away in outer space. So you guys remember the movie Gravity, where George Clooney's character got detached from the ship he was working on and then simply floated away into outer space? Yep, well, that would be horrendous. Firstly, there'd be the panic of being dislodged, then it would be the fear of floating away from help, then it would be like inching further and further away from rescue. Then you'd simply admit that you'd had it and you were never going to be rescued. You would then watch the universe spin around you until A, you probably wet yourself in your spacesuit, and then B, die after your oxygen supply runs out. Your body would then literally float on forever, decaying as it goes. Gross. In at number 8, Bubonic Plague. Now this isn't something that you'll ever have to worry about in the modern age of medicine, but Bubonic Plague would have absolutely sucked, like, trust me, although don't because I've never had it, but it sounds gross. Now if you don't know what bubonic plague is, it's an epidemic that spread across Europe in the 1300s and it killed around 200 million people. So it would start by you developing buboes, which were swollen lumps, which would then fill with pus and eventually ooze and bleed. Now these lumps could reach the size of an apple, which is horrendous. This would then be followed by a fever during which people would vomit blood. Not ideal. What also wouldn't be ideal is our number 7, being eaten alive by cannibals. So imagine your luck. You've been kidnapped, it's already a nightmare, but then you find out that your captors might eat you. Legit nightmare. Not only do they plan on eating you, they plan on eating you alive. And literally, you have to deal with this whole thing until like you either get an infection from your wounds or you bleed to death and you just have to watch. Anyone have a self-destruct button because this is pretty gruesome. Arguably worse, at number 6, we have rat burrowing through your stomach. Now this is actually an ancient torture method, and I know that Landon mentioned torture in part 1, but he kind of skimmed over the whole horrendous possibilities. One of which being rat burrowing. Now this was actually seen in Game of Thrones because it's gruesome, so obviously it was. Basically, a rat is trapped in a bucket and then placed on your chest and or belly. Eventually it freaks out and tries to claw its way out, ripping you apart from the inside as it does so. Wow. Now this next one is pretty bittersweet and on the fence controversial. In at number 5 we have being smothered by breasts. Breasts everywhere! Get them off me! Now when I mentioned this one when I was scripting this video to Danny, he was like, oh, actually, that'd probably be my favourite way to go. I love breasts. And I was like, really though, Danny? Actually think about it, because like, I for one would hate it because boobs aren't my favourite thing, but even if they were your favourite thing, it would be an absolute nightmare. You'd be having like a really good time with the boobs in your face, and then all of a sudden you'd be like, I can't, excuse me, I can't breathe, could you just get them off it? Boobs in the face, boobs in the face. It would be too much. That is not how you want to go. Again, I would say trust me, but don't. I just imagine it would be horrendous. In at number 4, we have skin peeled off, then dropped into lemon juice. When life gives you lemons, don't let someone peel off your skin then throw you in a vat of lemon juice. So firstly, you'd probably die of cardiac arrest from the pain of physically being skinned alive, but if you don't, you'll probably die from the all-encompassing, excruciating, searing pain of your sores being submerged in acidic juice. Sour way to die. In at number 3, we have at the almost peak of your success. So imagine landing your dream job. You want to be a pop star and you've just been offered a 10-figure deal and a spot in Taylor Swift's squad. You've worked your way up in a company, you're about to be named CEO, you're about to go on your first space mission, you're about to become queen of the friggin' universe, but you fall over and die before it can all happen. Nightmare. Your life would have been amazing, but you died before it was. Absolute anticlimax. Similarly disappointing, in at number 2, we would have dying of natural causes the day before immortality is actualized. So finally, we can all live forever and we can all stay 25 and look hot, and overpopulation isn't an issue, because why would it be? Now it is the day before we all take this mythical immortal pill, or we're simply like given the Philosopher's Stone or something. You're ready, you're set, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna live forever. But then you die. You aren't even the last person to die either, because that would be kind of cool. You're just dead. Nightmare. Everyone else lives. You don't. Sucks to be you. Okay guys, so we have reached that all-important moment in our top 10 worst ways to die part 3, and at number 1, I can't believe I'm even saying this, we have autoerotic asphyxiation accident. So guys, don't try this at home. It could end up in being the worst way to die. It could be you, and yeah. So this is when a sexual act, let's call it, goes wrong and you would be found purple in the face with a rope around your neck, naked with your flaccid penis out. Embarrassing? Yep. You literally won't be able to live that down. Literally. Now you would be wildly discredited and everyone would remember that that is how you died, and I'm not sure that you want that. In at number 10, dehydration station. So I mean, I've never even come close to being worryingly dehydrated in my life, and I absolutely thank God, because when I'm simply thirsty, I'm a bit of a nightmare and I'm like, can someone just give me a drink? Living in the Western world means that you're usually in relatively good supply of water, and even in hot parts of Europe and the States and the UEA, people will have plenty of drinking water with them. However, in developing countries, safe hydration can be an issue. Also, if people get lost on hikes, etc., and they don't have a good water supply, things can get dangerous. Around 60% of the adult body is made up of water, and every cell in our body needs it to survive. So we can last up to around 3 days without water, after which, over and out. Next up, from no drinks to way too many, in at number 9, we have death from alcoholism. So this could really stand for any addiction really, be it alcoholism, drug addiction, or addiction to food. Eventually, too much of something, especially a chemical like alcohol, will kill you. So to die as an alcoholic is a sad death indeed. There would be months, if not years, of struggle by the ever-present temptation of the bottle, which would have effects such as messing with your skin and damaging your organs. To drink yourself to death would be slow and painful and hurtful to those around you, but the worst part is that you couldn't really help it. If anyone is struggling with addiction, we would advise that you seek professional help and support. Getting medieval at number 8, we have being hung, drawn, and quartered, which is as delightful as it sounds. Yep, this is a thing that used to happen, especially in medieval times in Europe, so we're talking around the 12 and 1300s. So being hung, drawn, and quartered was actually the official penalty in England for high treason. What was it? Well, we'll tell you. It's where a prisoner who was sentenced to death would be dragged through the streets for crowds to hurl abuse and objects at them. Then they'd be taken to the gallows, where they'd be hung to a point where they were near death, then cut down, disemboweled, and then cut into 4 pieces, aka quartered. Ugh. Their bodies would then usually go on display for the public to see what happens to traitors. I mean, it's all very Game of Thrones. Next up, one form of torture that still exists in the present day, just in countries that, you know, yeah. In at number 7, we have being stoned to death. So I'm absolutely devastated that this still happens, especially at the hands of stuck in the Middle Ages extremist groups like ISIS. In Arabic, this is a form of capital punishment known as rajam. So it is still legal in some Middle Eastern countries, and it involves people being literally stoned until they die. Article 102 of the 2008 Islamic Penal Code says, an adulterous man shall be buried in a ditch up to his waist, and an adulterous woman up to her near chest, and then stoned to death. Guys, please put an end to this. It's not okay. In at number 6, we have stuck in a hole. So think like 127 hours, like that would absolutely suck. Now if you haven't seen the movie, I guess this isn't a spoiler because basically a dude gets stuck in a hole and it's pretty much the premise of the entire movie. So imagine you're on your own, you fall down a hole, you can't climb out, you are stuck. So what do? You try screaming, no one comes to help you. What do you do then? You try and climb out. It's not possible. The sheer panic and desperation would be the absolute worst. I for one am actually really scared of sinkholes. So if you fall into a particularly deep one of those, no one can come and rescue you as they might be sucked in too. Terrifying. Keeping it cheery at number 5, we have bleeding to death. So you would hope that if you get cut badly, help would be at hand, but sometimes it isn't, or sometimes some wounds simply cannot be healed. Now depending on the size of the wound, it could take anywhere between 90 seconds and over an hour to bleed out. So at first you would feel woozy, then cold, then you'd black out. Now if you were lucky, then you would fall unconscious quickly and know no more of what was about to happen. Now this would happen after you have lost around 3 pints of blood. Of course, if it is a slower bleed, you could be conscious for a while in a state of pure panic. I guess also bleeding to death is kind of messy, so not ideal. So here are a few tips that could save yours or someone else's life if they are bleeding. First, you need to stop the flow of blood by applying pressure to the wound. Then you need to fashion a tourniquet and call like an ambulance immediately. In at number 4, this can only happen to females, but it would absolutely suck. This is death during childbirth. Now this is absolutely horrible. I really need my next top 10 to be like a happy one about rainbows and sunshine. So the good news is, in the modern day of medicine, we have severely cut the risk of mothers dying during childbirth. That said, it can still happen. Now the reason that this would be one of the worst ways to die is because you would never know your child and it would be motherless, which is just incredibly sad. In at number 3, we have death from Alzheimer's. So according to statistics, Alzheimer's is the 6th biggest killer in the United States of America, which is horribly sad as this means dying a death after forgetting who you are and who your loved ones are. Alzheimer's is a progressive degeneration of the grey matter of the brain, which controls thinking, movement, memory and sensation. Now on top of that, it also affects the white matter too, and the parts of the brain that communicate to enable bodily functions. So one way which Alzheimer's will kill you is the loss of critical brain function, which can mean the body is unable to work properly. So I think for me personally, of all of the things on the list, dying from Alzheimer's would be my most feared death. So fingers crossed for just like a happy dying in the sleep when I'm 90. Again, hitting new cheery highs, at number 2, we have death from Ebola. So 2014 onwards saw an Ebola epidemic in many places in Africa, including Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone and Nigeria. Since then, over 11,000 people have died from the virus, and it isn't a pleasant way to go. So first of all, if you show signs of it, such as high fever, sore throat and muscular pains, it is highly likely that you'll be put in quarantine and you'll be on your own. There is only a 50% chance of survival, and that is lower in developing countries. After the initial symptoms, you'll begin vomiting and suffering from bouts of diarrhea. Those who die generally end up doing so from multiple organ failure as a result of internal bleeding. Like, wah, no. Okay guys, so we are almost there. We have reached that all important moment in our most amazing top 10 worst ways to die part 4, which could also easily be renamed the top 10 ways to bum people out in under 10 minutes. But the good news is, we're almost there. We're gonna get there. This is the number 1 worst way to die. That's right, in our number 1 we have innocent on death row. As well as many places in Asia Pacific and the Middle East, capital punishment still exists in 32 of the 50 United States of America. So now is not the time to debate this, but it is the time to say that being innocent on death row would be the absolute worst. Sure, you get a last meal, but that's not a reasonable exchange for the life and freedom you deserve. I mean, if anyone's seen Green Mile or Prison Break, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. It's pretty grim. A 2014 study on death row presented evidence that in modern times, at least 4.1% of people executed on death row were innocent. So I personally think that if this is ever going to happen, the evidence needs to be absolutely irrefutable. Now the worst thing, maybe even worse than the punishment itself, is that nobody believes you. This has to be the worst way to die. In at number 10, we have swallowing gum. So you're just chewing on gum, be it a breath-fresheningly minty treat or a cathartic piece of bubble gum, then uh-oh, you're choking. Countless people have choked on a piece of gum, leading them to their ultimate demise. It's estimated that around 12 people each year die from choking on gum in the United States alone. Sadly, if there's no one around to give you the old Heinrich maneuver, choking on gum could be the last thing you do. On top of that, swallowing large amounts of gum could kill you, like it did 19-year-old Samantha Jenkins from Swansea in 2015. In at number 9, we have forgetting to tie your shoelaces. You're just going about your day, having a little walk, thinking, yay, life is great when, uh-oh, you trip over your shoelace and dead. How boring and how avoidable. Many people are injured every year as a result of falling over untied shoelaces. Some even end up dead. In 2014, Scottish farmer Jim Sharp was caught and killed by his grain auger after he forgot to tie his shoelace. Not a nice way to go. Sure, but what if you don't work around heavy machinery? Well, you too are still at risk. Also in 2014, a homeless man fell off a cliff in New Zealand and drowned after tripping on his shoelace. In at number 8, we have too much video gaming. Yeah, it isn't just your mum and dad yelling at you for no reason. Too much video gaming is bad for your health. And also, what an awful way to die. You fight the zombies to win the game, but ultimately the game wins you after you drop down dead 10 minutes later. This happened in real life on several occasions. Jeff Daly and Peter Bukowski were both young and healthy but died of heart attacks in the early 1980s. This was both after getting high scores in the video game Berserk. In 2005, Lee Song-sop died in South Korea after playing too much StarCraft. After a grueling 50 hours of gameplay, Lee died of cardiac arrest. In at number 7, we have as a result of a prank accident. So all you want to do is make people laugh, but it ends up being really unfunny. It's a tale as old as time. Someone tries to prank another person, but people in situations are unpredictable and one party ends up getting seriously injured. In 2013, Colorado teen Pramila Lay was killed after she decided to prank her friend Nerrick Daniel Galley. Pramila hid in a closet with her cousin and made spooky noises to scare her other cousin and his friend Nerrick. Nerrick and the 15-year-old boy were freaked out and shot at the cupboard, killing Pramila. Again, plenty of other pranks have gone wrong, including falling from buildings and accidental hangings. If you are playing a prank on someone, do make sure it's safe and also that you know how they're likely to react. In at number 6, we have lighting up. So smoking is of course known to kill, although it isn't always mouth, throat and lung cancer that can be the issue. Thousands of people have died in the past by lighting up cigarettes in unsafe places. Often, people don't realise it's extremely unsafe to smoke at gas and petrol stations, forgetting that petroleum is highly flammable. This was the case in 2015 when an elderly man lit up while filling up his car at a Shell gas station in Maryland. This caused his fuel tank to ignite and he died. Again, many people forget the relationship between various chemicals and fire. In June 2016, a painter in Tamil Nadu in India died after lighting up as he hadn't washed off combustible chemicals off his skin following a paint job. If you do smoke, maybe consider quitting, but failing that, be extremely conscious as to where you're lighting your cigarette. Gas stations are an absolute no-no. In at number 5, we have stuck in the freezer. So there are between 2 to 5 deaths each year by people accidentally getting trapped in walk-in freezers, and really, it has to be one of the worst ways to die because A, it's pretty avoidable, B, you would be so panicked when you realised that you were stuck, and C, it would be extremely cold. This year alone, 2 people have died in giant freezers. Kitchen worker Carolyn Robinson died in an Atlanta hotel after becoming stuck in the freezer freezer for more than 13 hours. In the Netherlands, a man died in July 2016 after getting stuck in a freezer at Ollemans Foods. In at number 4, we have laughing to death. I mean, is this actually one of the worst ways to die? Wouldn't it be kind of fun, you having a good time? But actually maybe not, because you're like, ha ha ha, I'm having the best day, until your great time leads you to a cardiac arrest and you drop dead. You weren't ready. Several people have died in history laughing to death, including Alex Mitchell of Kings Lynn, UK in 1975. Alex watched a particularly hilarious episode of The Goodies featuring a Kung Fu Scotsman. He laughed for 25 minutes straight and then died of cardiac arrest. In at number 3, we have dancing, or to be more specific, Gangnam styling. Dancing can be brutal and deadly, although I enjoy it. In 2012, father of 3 Eamon Kilbride died aged 46 after imitating Psy's Gangnam style dance moves at his office Christmas party. After imitating the popular horse riding maneuver, he complained of chest pains and died on his way to hospital. Gangnam death struck again in 2015 after a teenager by the name of Jordan Brennan was killed. Jordan was dancing Gangnam style in a shop when a fellow teen found his dancing racist and pushed him over. He died of a head injury the next day. In at number 2, we have selfieing. Death from selfie.
But first, let me take a selfie.
Ah, the selfie. Hated by some, loved by many, it wasn't long after the craze began that people started dying. In the age of the selfie, many people are locked in an unspoken battle to take a better selfie than their contemporaries, leading people to try and capture them in very unsafe places. In 2014, 14 people died of selfieing, 34 in 2015, and this year, which isn't even over yet, selfies have led to the death of over 55 people. Just stop it, guys. Be safe. Okay, so we have reached that all-important moment in our most amazing top 10 worst ways to die. In at number 1, we have having a poo. Straining at stool is an actual cause of death, guys. It's what killed King George II and reportedly what led to the death of the King of Rock, Elvis Presley. How did this happen? Well, just to get sciencey for a second, your breathing changes when you're about to poop, which, if you strain, can lead to dizziness. Those who already have cardiovascular issues could find themselves in real trouble. And I mean, this has to be absolutely one of the worst ways to die, also very mundane because it's so avoidable, and you'll forever be known as the person who died whilst taking a poop. Boo.